Now, Excel offers 73 different types of charts. One big question is, how do you know when to use what type of chart? Let's open the next file, Chart Types. You can sit back while I take you through some of the different chart types and my recommendations of when to use which chart type. Anytime that you have a time series, that is, you're comparing data over time, it's always best to have the time running along the bottom of the chart. People are used to charts showing time going from left to right. Your option, if you have a few number of points, maybe 8 to 12, is a column chart. I'll hit page down. If you have many points, here I have over 50 years, a column chart would look horrible. You're almost always stuck going to a line chart or an area chart. I'll hit page down. Now, if you're trying to do a comparison that is not time-based, we don't recommend using a column chart. Instead, turn the chart sideways and create a bar chart. A couple of advantages of this. The first is on a bar chart, you have far more space in a landscape chart for very long titles, such as the titles here. You also won't confuse people into thinking that this is somehow a time progression. Page down. Pie charts, unfortunately, are very overused. The only time that you should be using a pie chart is if you need to show a component comparison, if you need to show how components add up to a whole. Now, pie charts are great for breaking one component into many pieces. I'll click page down. If you have 3 components, though, to break into many pieces, we have to use a special kind of column chart called a 100% stacked chart. It's much easier to compare components from year to year to year using this kind of chart than 3 pie charts. I'll hit page down. If you're trying to figure out if a correlation exists between 2 different variables, then you're going to use a scatter chart, also known as an XY chart. Page down. Another statistical chart is the frequency distribution. This allows you to take an entire population, you usually group them into bins. In this case, we're grouping by age brackets that are 5 years wide, and see how many people there are in each age range. Now, if you happen to be in human resources, or if you're a manager who has to do a performance review, this is one place where the radar chart comes in great. There's a few other types of charts that we didn't talk about. There's stock charts, if you're tracking the prices of securities. There's also a very difficult to use chart called a surface chart. This chart shows a 3-dimensional surface, sort of like a topographic map. So before you start creating a chart, you sort of have to figure out what message you're trying to convey. If you're showing a series over time, remember either column or line charts are the way to go. For a comparison between categories that are not time-based, bar charts. If you're trying to show component comparisons, either the pie chart or the 100% stack charts. And finally, for correlations, you'll turn to the XY or the frequency distributions. Some other charts, such as radar and stock, are very specialized, and there's a few chart types that you should very rarely use. And it's not just me saying that. The charting godfathers, the people that write the charting books, Stephen Few, Gene Zelezny, Edward Tufte, are all adamant that the column charts and pyramid charts are misrepresentative. In fact, Edward Tufte has a whole series of books where he pulls examples of misrepresentative charting, and he has a whole chapter on these charts. My note to you is if you choose to use either the pyramid or the cone charts, there's a good chance that you will end up in Tufte's next book as an example of the kind of chart not to use. Okay, now let's go on and take a look at charts for time series. We'll use File Open and open the time series file. Let's create a simple time series chart. We have just a few data points here, so it's appropriate to use a column chart. Select our data set from A1 to B10. This will be the easiest chart we create in this topic. Just hit Alt F1 and you're done. You have a simple column chart showing a time series. Now it seems a little bit redundant to have the legend on the right-hand side, especially since we have the word sales as the title and the word sales in the legend. If you go to the layout ribbon, choose Legend, None. There we go. That's a perfectly acceptable time series chart. Let's go on to the next worksheet. Now in this case, we have over 50 years worth of data. If we tried to create a column chart from this data set, it would not look very good at all. Let's choose the data. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, hit the down arrow, the End key, the down arrow, and the right key. From the Insert ribbon, open the Line drop-down and choose 2D Line, and then Line. That's a great looking chart. Even though we have over 50 years of data, the line shows up as a nice smooth line and people can understand the trend. Again, and this will be a recurring theme, if you only have one series of data, you almost always want to go to the layout ribbon and remove your legend. Now the other type of chart that works well for a large series with many points is a variant of the line chart called an area chart. Let's go to the Design ribbon and choose Change Chart Type. In the left-hand category, select Area, and then choose the first area chart. Click OK. Basically, in an area chart, the area underneath your line is colored with a solid fill color. In our example so far, we've had a data point for every year. Sometimes, though, you might be missing data points. Let's go on to the next worksheet. In this case, my researcher was able to find some data for the years 1951, 61, 71, and then once we got to the 90s, I have data points for every other year, and then in the 2000s, data points for every year. Unfortunately, though, Excel is plotting this data incorrectly. The distance from 1951 to 1961 along the axis is the exact same as the distance from 2001 to 2002. There's a setting that will allow us to tell Excel to create the axis as a time-based axis. Here's what we do. Right-click the numbers along the bottom of the chart. Choose Format Axis. In the first category, the axis options, about a third of the way down, there's a setting for axis type. We want to change this from automatic to specifically say that it's a date-based axis. Click Close. Now Excel understands that those are years, and it adds the appropriate space from 1951 to 1961. You'd be able to see this better if I added markers to the line. So let's go to the Design ribbon, change Chart Type, and choose a line chart with markers. Now you can see that Excel is plotting the data once every 10 years early on and once every couple of years later in the chart. Now if your data was specifically by date, in other words, year, month, and day, Excel would correctly get this setting right. However, in this case, where we have data by year, you have to explicitly go in and choose Format and change the setting yourself. Let's go on to the next worksheet, the Change Line worksheet. We'll scroll up to the top to take a look at a bad chart. Now here we have data where we had actuals for the first 6 quarters, but you'll notice subtly in cell A8 and cell A9, it's Q3F and Q4F. That means that it's a forecasted number. Now, unfortunately, the person creating the chart didn't have the skills necessary in order to differentiate that line. I'll hit page down and show you my suggested improvement. In this case, the actuals appear as a solid blue line, and the forecast appears as a dashed red line. Let's build this chart together. Hit page down, and you'll see that we have our original data set. Now remember, the last 2 numbers, for Q3 and Q4, are forecasted numbers. They're not real numbers. We need to cut the 67 and 147 from column B and move it over to column C. I'll select those cells, Control X to cut, go right, and Control V to paste. In order to make this work properly, the 7 in row 66 also needs to be copied instead of cut to cell C66. Actually, in this case, I'm just going to type it in. Okay, now we'll select this data set from cell A60 down through C68. Go to the Insert ribbon, open the Line dropdown. Now in the top row, we have 3 different thumbnails of line charts. This is an interesting spot to understand the difference between these thumbnails. In the first thumbnail, the lines actually cross. In the second thumbnail, the lines never cross, but the second line is in the middle of the chart. That is called a stacked line chart. You'll see stacked line, stacked column, and stacked bar charts, where the markers are appearing on top of each other, they never cross, but the top marker is not all the way at the top of the chart. The third icon is 100% stacked. This is where Excel ignores the actual numbers and instead plots percentages so that way they add up to 100%. In this particular case, we need the first thumbnail. There we go. Now we've created a chart where the blue is actual and the red is forecast, and for the first time, our legend on the right-hand side does a great job of explaining that. In case this chart ever gets printed in black and white, though, I'd like to do something to emphasize that the forecast is not an actual number. Go to our Format ribbon, and from the Current Selection dropdown, choose Series Forecast. Now we can use the Shape Outline dropdown, choose dashes, and the 4th dash setting. We'll click away to take a look, and you'll see that we've now replaced that portion of the line with a red dashed line. Now the chart reader is going to think that this is a single line, but in reality, because you set up the data, you understand that we secretly used 2 data series, one for actual and one for forecast. Okay, let's go on to the next worksheet. In this example, there's one period of the time series that is of interest. You'll notice that I called attention to that single point by changing the color. Hit page down, and we'll try it together. We'll select our data set from A31 through B38. Alt F1 to create the chart. Now I'm going to ask you to click on one of the blue columns, and you'll notice that we have a handle at the top and bottom of all 7 columns in the chart. Now do a single click on just the Friday column. Now we've selected a single data point. If I go to the Format tab, in the Current Selection dropdown on the left-hand side, it says Series Sales, Point Friday. Now that drop-down usually has most of the choices available to you, but I have to tell you it does not have each individual point in your chart. If you need to select a single point, you're going to have to select it by being able to click on it. First click selected the entire series. The second click selected just this one data point. Now that the data point is selected, it's very easy. We go to Shape Fill and choose a different color. There you go. Let's go on to the next worksheet, the Trendline worksheet. Now this example is very near and dear to my heart. As you know, I write books about Microsoft Excel, and the publisher gives me a deadline of how many pages I need to write every 30 days. On my first deadline, I started writing on day 25, which was a very painful thing. And now I realize that I have to write throughout the month. For every deadline, I'll set up a chart very similar to this one. There's a goal line at the top that indicates that I need to write 125 pages. I know there's a few days where I won't be writing, so the light blue line is the track line. That's how many pages I plan on writing every day. Column D shows the actual results. Well, in this case, I feel kind of bad because I'm not up to speed with the track line, but Excel has a great tool that will really hammer home for me that I'm not close at all. This is called a trend line. Let's select the green series. Go to the layout ribbon, open the trend line dropdown, and choose linear trend line. Excel has taken a look at the existing data points, done a data regression, and used the least squares method to fit a line to the existing actual points. Now, the reason that this works well immediately after choosing it is that I have many future days on the chart with no data. If you need to project in the future and you don't have empty cells for those future dates, you would have to go into more trendline options and ask Excel to format into the future. Now, typically for me, anything that's a forecast I don't want to have as a solid line on the chart, so I'd like to format the trend line. I'll click on the trend line. You'll see in the current selection box, it'll say Series Actual Trend Line, and now I can go to the Format tab, use the Shape Outline, dashes, and a dot. I also usually recolor that line in red. Wow, those dots are really small. I can barely even see them. Let me go choose a different shape outline. Dashes, and this time I'll choose the fourth option. There, that's much more pronounced. Now I can see that that red line is different than all the other lines. Now, even though I'm only a few pages behind today, this line projects out that by the end of the month, if I continue at the current pace, I'll miss by almost 25 pages. Usually seeing this chart is enough to get me into gear and start writing more pages to make that deadline. Okay, let's go on to the next worksheet, the arrows worksheet. Now, this is a really fun effect if you have sales that are going up and you want to emphasize that point by using arrows. Hit page down and we'll do this together. The first thing we have to do is add an arrow to the worksheet. That's done on the Insert tab of the ribbon. Open the Shapes dropdown, and you can choose any shape, but in this case, let's choose the upward pointing block arrow. Now you want to click and drag in the worksheet, not in the chart, to create an arrow about the right size. That looks good. I'll use Control-C to copy, and now I'll select the chart and select my data series. Control-V to paste, and we replace the columns with arrows. It's a great effect. Let's go on to the next worksheet, the year-to-date worksheet. Now this is a perpetual problem. Here we have two data series that are of different scale. The sales in column B are monthly sales, running in the $20,000 to $45,000 range. In column C, though, we have year-to-date numbers that run up to $346,000. The size of the year-to-date series is so large that you can barely see any of the variability in the blue columns. Excel can easily handle this, and the trick is to take that year-to-date series and move it to be plotted against a secondary axis. Let me show you how. Click one of the red columns, go to either the Layout or Format ribbon, and choose Format Selection. At the bottom of the Series Options category in the Format Data Series dialog is a box for Plot Series On. We want to choose this series and say that it should be plotted against the secondary axis. Click Close. Now, the problem here, you might think that this didn't work, but what actually happens is because the series are on different axes, Excel has plotted them directly on top of each other. The solution to this is we need to take the year-to-date series and change it from a column to a line so we'll be able to see both sets of numbers. You'll notice in my current selection drop-down in the upper left that I still have series year-to-date selected. While that series is selected, we're going to go to the Design ribbon, change chart type, and choose a line. It's very important that just that series is selected before you choose Change Chart Type. That allows you to change the type of just one series and not the other series. Now, my problem with this chart is no one will understand that the blue bars relate to the numbers on the left side of the chart and the red line relates to the numbers on the right side of the chart. My usual solution is to color code the numbers. Let's select the numbers on the right side of the chart. Go to the Home ribbon, change the font color to red. Choose the numbers on the left side of the chart and change the font color to blue. There you go. A very simple solution to a very common problem. Let's go on to the next worksheet. Hit page up. Well, now here we have a chart with all sorts of things going on. There's 3 series. The white series shows sales of the old stores. The black series shows sales of the new stores. And the red line shows total sales from last year. This is a great chart because it shows in November and December, if it hadn't been for the new stores, we would actually be down year to year. This is an interesting chart to create because the first 2 series are actually stacked column and the third series is a line. Let's hit page down and we'll build it together. Select the data from A31 through D43. Alt F1 to create the chart. Now initially we need to change the chart to a stacked column chart. Click Change Chart Type and choose the second thumbnail for stacked column. Click OK. Now the green series, the series for last year, we now need to change just that series to be a line chart. Click the series, and with that series selected, go to Change Chart Type and choose Line. Click OK. It works perfectly. The first 2 series are stacked columns. Because a line chart is completely different than a column chart, Excel understands that you're not trying to stack those values. Now from there, we have some simple formatting. Let's reselect the line. On the Format tab, choose a dashed effect under Shape Outline. Okay, now a few more tricks with this chart. Because this is retail, most of the sales are done at the end of the year, and so we have that big wide gap in the upper left-hand corner of the plot area. The legend is taking up a lot of space on the right-hand side, but we definitely need the legend. It's very important. But I'm going to take the legend and click it to select the legend. Now you remember under the built-in options, we could choose to put it at the right or the left, but we actually have infinite number of places to take this legend. You have to click on the border of the legend, and you can drag it and drop it anywhere on the chart. Now, something new in Excel 2007, and it's a bit annoying, is the legend is now transparent. While the legend is selected, on the Format tab, use Shape Fill and choose a white background for the legend. Now that we have all that space on the right-hand side, we can click in the middle of nowhere on the chart to select the plot area and extend the plot area to the right to make our bars larger. Now let's talk about titles. I had a big long title in the original chart. Go to the Layout tab, choose Chart Title above Chart. Okay, well now that didn't work like I expected, and that's because I've changed too many things in this chart. I've done too many custom formatting for that built-in option to work. It's okay. We can recover. Let's choose the plot area, and we'll manually shrink the size of the chart to make room for our title. We'll have to reposition the legend, and now we can work on that big long title. Titles are a little bit frustrating to me. I would like to have control over the absolute height and width of the title, but Excel always decides this itself. I'll click the title once, and then go to the Home ribbon, where I'll make the title smaller by clicking Decrease Font Size a couple of times. Now I'll select the text in the title and begin to type the title. Now, if I just kept typing at this point, Excel would decide where to word wrap. But I would really like to word wrap here, so I'm going to hit the Enter key and type the rest of the title. That looks really good. In the original chart, it was left aligned. Before you can change the alignment, you want to click on the border of the title to exit text edit mode. And now I can use left align and then drag the title to a new location along the left side of the chart. There you go. Now we still need to change the colors of the columns. You're more than welcome to do that yourself. Let's move on to the Accessories worksheet. The Accessories worksheet talks about some of the accessories that we can use primarily with line charts. Hit Control Home to go to the top of the worksheet. This line chart has 5 different series. Click on the chart to select it and go to the Layout tab. It's possible to add a line that extends from the high point to the low point for every year. This is located under the Lines drop-down. Choose High-Low Lines. Excel will draw the lines in. This is an interesting effect, and it's an effect that's used a lot on stock charts. Hit Page Down to go to the next example. In the previous example, high-low lines could extend from any series to any other series, depending on which series was high or low at that particular point. Up-down bars always extend from the first series to the last series. They're fairly similar to high-low lines with one difference. Click on the chart to select it. In the Layout tab, choose Up-Down Bars and then Up-Down Bars. Now you see that these are wider than high-low lines, and they also have the added benefit that they change colors depending on which line is above or below the other line. In 2001, the blue line is below the red line, so we have white bars indicating a negative balance. In 2005, the blue line is ahead of the red line, and so we have dark bars indicating a positive balance. Hit Page Down to go to the next example. Drop lines are very useful, particularly on area charts. If you have an area chart, sometimes it's hard for the eye to follow from the baseline up to the point to understand exactly where the number hits. Click on the Drop Lines chart to select it. On the Layout tab, open the Lines drop-down and choose Drop Lines. Now, drop lines are only valid on area charts. Well, there you go. There's a few accessories that you can use when you're using line or area charts. Now, the last example, the last worksheet, is just something to look at. This is a stacked column chart with 4 different series. Stacked column charts are very, very difficult for the eye to follow. It's easy to watch the bottom series. We can see that Northeast is increasing. And it's somewhat possible to watch the top series to see how West is changing. But for any series in the middle, Central and South, it's almost impossible for your reader to understand what's going on. If you choose this chart and open the Lines drop-down, the choice for Series Line is how I was able to add the lines that extend from column to column. It's still not perfect. You should really try and avoid this type of chart. Now, in the next topic, we'll be talking about all types of charts that will make comparisons such as these. I'll close this file. Well, let's open our next file. File, Open, and we'll choose the category file. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that people tend to use pie charts when they should never use a pie chart. Here I'm comparing prices of different cars. This is horrible. Now, I've added labels so we can actually see the prices. But there's no good way to tell if the H3 or the Hybrid Escape is larger. Never use a pie chart for this type of chart. You should use a bar chart. We'll move on to the next worksheet, and we're going to build our first simple bar chart. Select the data from A1 to B6. On the Insert tab, open the Bar drop-down and choose 2D Bar. Bar charts are most powerful when they're sorted in either ascending or descending sequence. Even after the chart is created, we can go back to the original data set and sort it. Click a cell in the worksheet, and then click a single cell in the sales column. On the Data tab, click the A to Z button to sort ascending. Now, it's interesting, we sorted the data in ascending order, but it shows up in the chart in descending order. That's the way the bar charts work. The first item in your spreadsheet generally shows up as the last item in the bar chart. Keep that in mind, sort your data in ascending order, and you'll have a great comparison to show how the categories differ. Now let's move on to the clustered worksheet. Here's an interesting situation where we have a bar chart, but we've added a second series to actually add a time component. We're primarily focused on this year, that's why I made those bars dark. But I added a second series in a light-colored bar in order to give us a reference to show whether the numbers are increasing or decreasing from last year. Let's hit Page Down and we'll build this chart together. Choose the data from A26 through C31. On the Insert ribbon, open the Bar drop-down, and we don't want a stacked bar, we want the clustered bar. We'll have to do a little bit of formatting to really put the emphasis on the current year. Choose one of the red bars. On the Format tab, under Shape Fill, choose a dark color. Now click on one of the blue bars. Go to Format, Shape Fill, and choose white. Now, you can still see the bar, but when I click away from the chart, the bar will actually disappear. That's because these bars have no outline. Click where the bar used to be, and go to Shape Outline, and choose a dark outline. Now, this is an interesting example. I said that time series should always have the time going across the bottom of the chart. But here we primarily have a category chart, and the time component is really just to give us a reference of whether things changed from last year to this year, and so the time actually goes down the chart. Let's move on to the next worksheet. Well, here I just want to show an example of a stacked bar chart. Just like stacked column charts, stacked bar charts are generally very difficult to read. However, in this particular case, it's a great example. We're interested in the first series. That series in column B is the laser cost, and the point of the chart is how one competitor has a significant advantage in that component. Because this component is closest to the baseline, it's very easy for the reader to understand the difference in the laser engine cost. It's also easy for the reader to look to the right and understand the difference in the total cost. While stacked bars and stacked columns are usually a bad idea, in this particular case, where we're interested in just the first component, it works out great. Well, that's bar charts. I'll close this file.